You're listening to the Packernet Podcast Network.
It's only a kick, a jump, a block. It's only a serve. It's only a tackle, a run. It's only for the fans. After all, it's only pressure. You got this. Adidas.
With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident panelist, as always, Ryan Schlipp. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_daddy. Well, lots of stuff to talk about today. We'll see how much we get through. We do have more coaches making comments and whatnot, so I figure we should do that. Only one of them is actually up on the Packers YouTube channel, so I can't actually watch back some of these. So we'll just go through the old Twitters here and see what was reportedly said and whatnot. Then we got Rich Bisaccia, his question and answer, a couple other little interesting things that the Packers, I guess, social media people put together, kind of get to know this person, that person, whatever. I'm going to try to fly through this. I'm not going to play any of the clips just because, for the sake of time, I'd like to get to some other stuff today, but we'll see how she goes. Starting off, we got defensive line coach Jason Rebrovich. So remember, we've got kind of a revamped coaching staff and just kind of a lot of people on the defensive side now, and the defensive line in particular. So we had our strictly an edge rush coach get moved to defensive line, which would have had a different connotation entirely if this was still a 3-4 defense. But at this point, defensive line is just the interior and the exterior guy, the edge rushers and the defensive tackles, as one. So he's expanding that, and then he's got some people underneath him, or at least working closely with him in some capacity. Vince Ogabasi, who is another guy that I think is overrated, or not overrated, excuse me, that's the exact opposite of what I'm trying to say, overqualified for his job as the assistant defensive line coach. He's going to be the number 2 guy helping with this defensive line. He has very deep knowledge of this, the way that Jeff Hafley runs the defensive line. So those guys are going to have 2 separate coaches. And then, to some degree, Anthony Campanile or Campanile, or however you say the guy's name, is the linebackers coach, but he's also the run game coordinator. So just for the defensive line, we've kind of got like 2.5 guys. You got Rebrovich as the main guy, you got Ogabasi, and then, of course, run defense is a big part of it. So the Jersey guy is going to be, let's call him Jersey guy. I call him Jersey Mike. His name's Tony, but Jersey Tony doesn't really roll off the tongue, But anyways, a couple of the notes from him. Ryan Wood says, Packers defensive line coach Jason Rebrovich, who coached outside linebackers in the previous 3-4 system, says the biggest change in his new job description is meeting with the interior linemen daily, was more of an intermittent thing in the past. Paul Brettel quoted him as saying, it's an attack front. It's about tackles for losses and sacks. And when I first saw this, I immediately thought, who's going to love this? Every Packers fan who hates Rashawn Gary. Because remember, it was the old regime that thought, I don't want to say sacks and things are stupid, but the idea that that's wrong too. Pressures are incredibly important. Now, again, I don't think there's necessarily a difference. I think this same regime, remember, Rebrovich was a part of both staffs, but before we heard a lot about pressures, and now we're hearing tackles for loss and sacks, but I don't think this new crew is against pressures. I think they understand the value of it, and I certainly think the old administration understood the value of sacks over and above just pressures. However, as I've said before, You kind of get what you practice. And when you come in saying, sacks are great and all, but pressures are what we want. We want to generate pressure. We want to affect the quarterback. We heard that 1,000 times. And we were a defense that had a lot of pressures, but not a ton of sacks. Now, could be a coincidence, I don't know, but it's kind of in theme with what I've been saying is you get what you preach, you get what you practice. One of the first things we hear from the defensive line coach, Jason Rebrovich, is it's an attack front and it's all about tackles for a loss and sacks. Now, if that's exactly how you feel and that's the new mantra coming in, it's also hard to imagine them coming to the podium and going, hey, who cares about sacks? We got pressures. It's fine. Sacks are overrated. You know what I mean? Like, that's just that first thing that came to my head. This is not something we've heard before. Did Joe Barry and that crew, which included Rebrovich, want to get tackles for a loss and sacks? Yes. Have you ever heard anybody from that group come to the podium and say this is an attack front and it's all about tackles for a loss and sacks? Never. I've never heard it. And I heard it within 5 seconds of Jason Rebrovich coming to the podium. He elaborated on that, according to Matt Schneidman, and said, we're going to look to create havoc in the backfield. Now, again, as I've said before, that's exciting stuff. Every positive comes with negatives. It's could potentially lead to more, explosive plays. If you get upfield and somebody gets, what? All these things have positives and negatives. But at the end of the day, I think most Packer fans are excited that this is the direction we're going, even if it means that maybe some things that we had under control before are less under control now. And apparently I don't know if this was a direct quote or if this is an inference by Ryan Wood, but he says Packers defensive line in Jeff Hafley's 4-3 defense looks to do what San Francisco and Houston does, and then goes on to the whole quote that we've already discussed. Again, I don't know if Rebrovich said that or if Ryan Wood is inserting that in there. But Houston is another one that, we talk about the Jets, we talk about the 49ers, and I know somebody, don't get mad at me, whoever that somebody was, called in yesterday, 2 days ago, whatever, and talked about the Chiefs, which I think there are some similarities to. Houston might be another one to look into. And by the way, I just looked at Houston. We might talk about it a little bit today, depending on if we can get to that topic. In fact, now that I brought it up, we probably should. I didn't realize how good Houston's defense was. We look at it and we go, well, they got C.J. Stroud and the wide receivers popped off. Boom, playoffs. The defense was I don't even know what their stats were in terms of the rankings or anything. I haven't looked at it. I didn't bother to. I was just looking at some of the pieces that were in place, some of the PFF grades and whatnot. And obviously I knew that they had drafted, what's his name? The pass rusher. And he did a pretty good job. And I didn't know the full extent of how good of a job the defense has done. And by the way, see if we can get to this too. We might as well. Houston's going to come up a couple times if I can help it. The idea that Houston does not have a good front office, not that I've looked a ton of, into it, but even remove C.J. Stroud from the equation if you want to use my same rationale of, okay, you had the number 2 pick, you just took the best guy available, whatever. They've done a really good job. I mean, these guys are good football players. Anyways, Ryan Wood also says, Jason Rebrovich believes new scheme will produce a great outcome for twitchy, penetrative defensive linemen like Devonte Wyatt. And again, we've discussed that. If the whole thing is getting upfield and creating disruption, that has Devonte Wyatt written all over it. And to be honest, I kind of think it has Kenny Clark written all over it. Now, they may use him, again, as more of that one technique. They've been trying to force him into this sort of, in a 3-4, the nose tackle role. Now he may be more of the I guess nose tackle or one tackle, whatever you want to call him, whatever the phraseology is. And I don't like that, but we also don't have a lot of options. But I think if we didn't do that and we just went to Kenny and said, get into the backfield, I think it would benefit him a lot. But Wyatt, 1,000%. The guy is a 9 out of 10 pass rusher and a 2 out of 10 run defender. So if it's like, just get past the guy, get to the quarterback, Wyatt's going to freaking explode. He goes on to say, quote, the thing about Devonte Wyatt, he's quick, fast, and athletic, so you're going to have to develop things around him to use those attributes. Paul Brettel says, when defensive line coach Jason Rebrovich was talking about the Packers group, he mentioned similarities with the 49ers, Jets, and Texans. So again, we know 49ers and Jets, the Texans once again come up, which makes sense. I mean, who's the Texans head coach? He's got the 49ers lineage. I think the more important thing to me is we looked at Vic Fangio and all of the Vic Fangio trees last year, and they were all garbage. Now what are we comparing to? The Jets, the 49ers, and the Texans. I don't know how many more that you could possibly tie to, but significantly better defenses. Rebrovich goes on to say that there's no question in his mind T.J. Slaton, who's a prototypical 3-4 nose, can transition. Quote, T.J. Slaton might be the biggest man-athlete I've ever seen in my life. If you put a basket here, T.J. Slaton can two-hand slam it. Listen, I'm all for it. Again, I haven't been super excited about Slaton and what he's been able to do. For a larger guy, his one job is to come in and be a run defender. He hasn't been able to do it up to this point. Now, he's had some flashes, and I understand why people like him. You don't usually see him, and then all of a sudden he blows it up in the backfield, and you're like, dang, that was awesome. But generally, you don't always see the times where they miss this or that or the other, and he does not. The stats aren't great, the grades aren't great. It just hasn't really worked. But I'm basically hitting the reset button on pretty much everybody, which is what I was excited to do about Darnell Savage, but the Packers basically said no, that he's not getting one. But everybody, Stokes, I mean, even the guys that are pretty good, let's see what we can do here. Matt Schneidman says, we're moving on to linebackers coach Tony Jersey Tony, Big Tony. I'll call him Big Tony. There it is. I'm not going to say his last name anymore. Big Tony is from New Jersey and has brothers named Vito and Nunzio. That's a thing of beauty. Asked who's going to wear the green dot. He says it's an ongoing conversation this offseason. Doesn't expect to have an answer emerge until camp. Everywhere I've been, it's been like that. But does mention Quay doing it in the past, which makes sense. I mean, I'm sure they, like many of us, are viewing it a certain kind of way. And the coaches may all disagree. Who knows? But I'm sure they have some idea of what's probably going to happen. But they're not going to write anything in stone at this point. And they're certainly not going to speculate in front of the media before the guys even get into practice against each other. Big Tony first met Jeff Hafley when he was a high school coach, says they created a common bond on how the game should be played and have kept in contact. Quote, I probably owe more to Jeff Hafley in terms of my development and opportunities in my professional life than anybody else. And again, similar to what I've said about players, we're building in a certain direction. We're going out and getting players that have a certain demeanor. They have a certain attitude. They have an attacking style of play. And they're violent and they're freaking mean. But we're not just going out and getting players and then getting coaches that are passive. We're going out and getting guys who have I'm not going to even necessarily say their demeanor, but their philosophy toward football. You can be kind of a quote-unquote soft guy or a nice guy or whatever, but your philosophy towards football, it helps if you're kind of a screw-loose psychopath. Don't get me wrong. But your philosophy toward the way that football should be played, specifically the way that defense should be played, is geared toward violence, attacking. We go out and get Hafley. Hafley brings in Big Tony. Why? Partially because they have some common understanding of, he can implement what Hafley wants because there's an understanding, but also there's an appreciation. They both view it the same way in terms of this is how it should be done. Not just, I happen to know how you like things done, so let me help you usher in this new thing that you're doing. Asked about Quay Walker, he says, this guy is very dialed in, and I'm excited for him. About Edgerrin Cooper, he said, he's an explosive player. He has lots of explosive traits physically. He's got a well-rounded skill set in what he's able to do. He also went on to say he's got really good get-off. That definitely jumps off the tape if you watch those reps. He has an ability to run people down. I think we're moving on to Derek Ansley now, another guy that is overqualified for this job. Ryan Wood says, Packers D pass game coordinator. Let's look at the coaching staff real quick. So obviously when it comes to the D-backs, you've got Hafley, who is primarily a DB guy, who is our defensive coordinator. You've got Ansley, who is a former defensive coordinator who has come in to be our passing game coordinator. Then we have Ryan Downard, who's going to continue to be the defensive backs coach. I think many of us were not super thrilled with that, but it does seem like the strategy is to keep cohesion, but also bring in people that can help us. Now, the DB thing is actually kind of interesting because Downard, although he may have some familiarity himself, he was with the former Packers staff. Ansley has more familiarity with more of the Joe Barry style of things as well. But either way, we've got the cohesion with Downard. We've brought in the experience with Ansley. That's kind of the DB tree. But D pass game coordinator Derek Ansley recruited Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Corey Ballantyne, Xavier McKinney, and Javon Bullard in high school. No stranger to secondary he's inheriting. When you coach in the SEC for 10 years, you kind of dabble with everybody, he says. That's kind of cool. With Xavier McKinney, by the way, he actually helped to land him in Alabama. All the other guys went different places. Ansley on cornerbacks playing on the perimeter, quote, we call it the red line. There's no Wi-Fi service. There's no phone a friend. That's kind of funny. And again, it's a coaching style and philosophy. It's not that they're exclusively playing man, because they're not. And it's not like they didn't play man before. But it's when we come in, what do we talk about? How do we talk about things? Ansley's coming into this and talking to the corners and saying, just so you know, you're on your own. It's different. Talking about Xavier McKinney, he said he's a ball guy 24/7. I don't think he has a whole lot of other hobbies. Oh, you mean so he's not going to be live streaming himself with a farmer hat, driving around plowing his fake crops in a video game? I'm sorry. I don't know why I keep bringing that up. He also said Jair Alexander was at Lambeau 2 or 3 weeks before the first phase of the offseason program, working with strength coaches, and that he's been here for every day of the second phase as well. Love to hear that from Jair. I know there was some question not only about his buy-in toward the end of the season when everybody seemingly was getting disgruntled, but if you remember last year during training camp and whatnot, he stayed away. Now, he said he stayed away because he was doing his own training regimen, which I chose to believe, which I thought was fair if you feel like you've got a thing that's more geared toward making you a premier player, as opposed to, coming in and kind of getting the 101s with the young guys. I guess I kind of understand that, but it's still kind of like, it feels like it's a delicate balance and a delicate game there. So it's nice to hear that now that we've got all new stuff and you kind of need to be here. Where is he? He's here 2 weeks early. So it just kind of confirms how it was before, that he wasn't just blowing off the team and making an excuse. He genuinely was out where he felt like he could be at his best. Ryan Downard up next said on the remade safety position, I was obviously very happy after the draft. I was happy after free agency. So that's pretty straightforward. On Xavier McKinney, he says 2.9 is everything we thought he was going to be. Bill Huber says he really likes McKinney, can play deep coverage, underneath coverage, can provide run support or blitz, and he's an excellent tackler. Well, when you go out and you pay top dollar for a guy that you expect to be one of the best safeties, not only on the team, but in the entire NFL, yeah, you kind of hope that he can do a little bit of everything. Downard said that McKinney and Jair Alexander sit next to each other in meetings. Coaches have been extremely high on both of them this offseason. I love that because, again, it's about buy-in. We've got this really young team that's really motivated to be the best. And we've always kind of felt that was Jair, that he was a part of that young crew who just wanted to be great. And then as things started to go in a different direction, as things start to tear apart, you kind of wonder who's going to the dark side and who's not. I get the impression Devondre Campbell was going in that direction. I get the impression Rasul maybe was going in that direction, and I kind of feel like Jair was being pulled in that direction. And now that we've kind of cut off some of the more negative attributes of the guys that were a little bit more on the far end of the negative side, where's Jair? He is tucked in tight with Xavier McKinney, talking football, talking about the Packers, talking about how to be the best, and fully bought into this. I love it. On Xavier McKinney, quote, he's an elite guy in this league. He says McKinney's leadership on the back end instantly boosts the culture from a standpoint of toughness. I freaking love that. Again, what are we trying to do? Bringing in guys that are going to raise the toughness. I'll be honest, last year, what happened? We had the New England Patriots come in here, kick the living crap out of this defense that we thought was going to be really good this year, and then start talking about how the Packers are a bunch of fake tough guys, and the Packers had no response to it. They got knocked around by actual tough guys and then mocked in their own freaking house and had nothing to say back. That's the culture that has to change. Moving on to Rich Bisaccia on Josh Jacobs, who he coached with the Raiders. Quote, he's a bright light personality-wise. He loves football, and it shows in his actions. Says he's appreciative of having 3 kickers to compete for now. On whether or not they will carry the 3 kickers on the roster, he says it might be those 3, might be 3 other ones. I don't know, might be 6, but we appreciate Brian getting to the point we have now with 3-man competition, or getting it to the point where we have a 3-man competition. On the new kickoff rule, he says we have an exciting guy returning kicks with Keyshawn Nixon. And then on the re-signing of Keyshawn, he says, I think it's exciting not only for him, but for the organization to get a guy that's done what he's done the past 2 years and become the player that he's become. Ryan Wood says he was asked how he's seen Anders Carlson respond to missed kicks in San Francisco. He said, I think his response has been work. Bisaccia says Carlson arrived at offseason program stronger than last season. Interesting since he already had a big leg. Rich Bisaccia says, quote, I absolutely adore Keyshawn Nixon. The full quote, apparently, let's put all the cards on the table. I absolutely adore Keyshawn Nixon. And that's obvious, right? The only reason Keyshawn's even here is because of Rich Bisaccia. We have our starting slot corner because Rich Bisaccia pounded the table and said, I want him on special teams. And remember, it wasn't even to be a kick returner. He had never done it before, at least not seriously. He goes on to be a great kick returner and a solid slot corner. Crazy. On the Wisconsin long snapper, Peter Bowden, he says, we did a lot of work on him. We like Peter. He has good size, athletic, working on the velocity of his snap. Also compliments Matt Orzich, how he came back. Another late arriving quote by Jason Rebrovich. He says, I'm not trying to correlate football with war or anything like that, but we're the Navy SEALs. We're the first line of defense. The rest of the guys are going to sit back there and do what they need to do. I think Marines would have been fine. I don't know if you had to go to Navy SEALs, but fair enough. Another little bit longer thing here. Rich Bisaccia said he had a lot of conversations with Mark Murphy and Matt LaFleur before the Packers voted against the new kickoff rules. Makes sense he'd have input. Bisaccia believed in testing the rule change in preseason before making such a radical shift. Which makes sense. We heard Mark Murphy say that already. But he went on to say, we had a lot of conversations. Being a longtime coach, I loved kickoff. It's one of my favorite plays, and the ability it becomes a 3-level defense. No idea what that means. I'm not reading this. I hate when they transcribe people talking, and they're kind of just rambling and the sentences don't make sense. Whatever. We understand how this all came to be. Another late quote, Derek Ansley on Carrington Valentine. If you see him walk through the door now, he looks a lot different than last year in a good way. He's attacked the weight room. He's put weight on. We're proud of his work ethic. Wes Hodkiewicz with a quote from Big Tony, I'd be out of my mind to not really be excited about working with the Packers. He said, I grew up in New Jersey, not far from where St. Cecilia's is, where Coach Lombardi coached. My whole life, my father talked about this place, and he was a football coach, and that was kind of his idol, was Vince Lombardi, much like every other Italian-American in North Jersey that was involved in football. All right, I think that's about it. Why don't we go ahead and take a break? We'll come back and we'll do some more stuff. We'll be right back. We all have smartphones, and we all know they're pretty amazing, but they also can be amazingly distracting, especially when we're around other people. So US Cellular wants us to reset our relationship with our phones by putting down our phones for $5. That's right, a company that sells phones wants us to put down our phones. And to see what we find, learn more at uscellular.com/built-for-us. In the hobby, it's not easy being a fan of ripping packs or repacks. We get all hyped up thinking we're going to get some high-value Jordan Love card, but with zero transparency on available cards and hit rates, it's all just a shot in the dark. Until now, introducing slab packs from arenaclub.com, the only repack that provides real value, a complete view on all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. Now when I buy slab packs on Arena Club, it finally feels like I know what I'm getting. And honestly, the best thing for me and my son is the fact that we're kind of novices into this. When I walk into a card shop with my son, and a card says it costs $40, kind of just taking his word for it that that's a good value. So I appreciate the transparency on grading, as well as just getting excited about seeing what you could potentially get. Right now, you can get 10% off your first purchase by going to arenaclub.com/packdaddy. Wow, that's crazy offer. 10% off a $400 slab pack. That's $40 right there. Anyways, that's arenaclub.com/packdaddy for 10% off your first purchase.
Mother's Day is around the corner. Find the perfect gift for the mom in your life with a stunning piece of jewelry from Blue Nile. From timeless pearls to dazzling gemstones, Blue Nile has something she'll adore. Need it fast? Most items can ship overnight. Plus, enjoy guaranteed free shipping and returns. Don't miss our special Mother's Day deals. Save big on the season's most beautiful trends. For a limited time, get up to 50% off by going to BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
You're a podcast listener, and this is a podcast ad. Reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Lips and Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a reproduced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience with Lips and Ads. Go to lipsandads.com now. That's LIBSYN ads.com.
So I mentioned the Houston Texans. This really isn't about the Houston Texans quite as much, but it's just going to check a couple things off my list. First of all, Kevin Cole, who I've mentioned a couple times, did something with Ben Baldwin here. He's got some YouTube videos up. One of them, I don't even fully know. He's got a bunch of different videos here. Let me look at how many he has. Looks like 2 different ones for front office, so I'm not entirely sure what the difference is necessarily. But anyways, they had done their front office rankings, and without having dug super deep into them, one of the biggest annoyances that I saw right off the top of my head was that the Texans were bottom 5 for Ben Baldwin. And then after digging around, I come to find out that initially he was bottom 5 for Kevin Cole as well, but had gotten just removed and taken out into the honorable mention. So, bottom 10 for sure, maybe 6th worst. Very quickly, before I move on to the other thing that I wanted to talk about for why this even came up necessarily, I do want to look at the Houston Texans really quickly, because I think there's a couple different questions that come up, because it's kind of like with the Bears, right? How much credit do you give the Bears for picking Caleb Williams when you're sitting at number 1 overall? There's kind of 2 things here, and I think that the Houston Texans kind of brought this to light. It might seem on its face, biased, disingenuous, whatever you want to call it, for me to give the Bears a C for drafting Caleb Williams, but let's say a B or C plus or B minus or whatever for picks like, C.J. Stroud or Will Anderson or Derek Stingley. They've had 3 picks, by the way. All 3 of those were in the top 3. They had the 3rd overall pick in 2022 and then the 2nd and 3rd in 2023. But what's the difference between Caleb Williams and C.J. Stroud? Results. You get no credit for process. But I think it's also important to keep in mind, especially for people like me who try to focus very much on the data side of things, is that process isn't the only thing that matters. There is another thing called evaluation. Now, process is important, as I've said, because evaluation can't get you all the way there. You cannot ever get to the point where you have perfectly evaluated things, and so it's important to protect yourself with process. And there are certain, not even necessarily rules as much as guardrails, and certain things that if you follow it, you're more likely to be successful than if you don't follow it. In the early rounds, especially focusing on premier positions. Of course, focusing on more picks would be a good process. And then as far as trades are concerned, making sure that, they tend to work in your favor, trading back being the easiest way to make sure that you do that. But at the end of the day, there's always a hit and miss rate. And if your hit rate is relatively high, for example, the Houston Texans have had 3 picks in the top 3. That's not necessarily very impressive. But to hit 3 out of 3, and not just hit 3 out of 3, but you're talking C.J. Stroud, who's, I think, an incredibly gifted quarterback. We'll see what happens. It's kind of similar to Jordan Love, where it's like, let's just see how it plays out. But if this is like the worst we're going to see of him, I mean, it's going to be Jordan Love, C.J. Stroud fighting for the top of the NFL for a long time. You've got Derek Stingley, who massively flew under the radar as a incredibly good corner, and then Will Anderson, who came in as a rookie and dominated as a pass rusher. I mean, you could argue those are 3 top 10 guys with top 5, top 3, top 2 potential. Part of the reason I bring that up, by the way, is as I look through kind of what they talked about and why the Houston Texans were so low, it's almost entirely because of process. They hated the trade up for Will Anderson. Not even going to get into the details of it. Apparently they overpaid, and probably massively so, because they couldn't seem to get over it. But again, on some level, you have to acknowledge, first of all, we need to account for the fact that they traded up for a pass rusher, which is not the same as trading up for a tight end. Second of all, it worked. So there is kind of a balancing act between process and results, and you can't do 100% of either. We need to give them credit for going up for a pass rusher, process, and for getting the right guy, results. And we can't 100% say, in hindsight, was it the right decision? Because it probably was. Because you can't know that it was the right decision. So I can't give you 100% for process or for the results side of it. But it talks about how, Kevin, because of the results, took him out of the bottom 5, which I think it's staggering that they're even in the bottom 5 because apparently process is that bad, but took him out because the results were okay. But Ben Baldwin kept him in there because the process was apparently so terrible, primarily due to a trade that netted them a premier pass rusher. They also both felt as though the Texans are only good because of C.J. Stroud, and you shouldn't give them that much credit for C.J. Stroud. Let me just finish with this. That's partially true, if I felt like that was the case. Let me just run through what the Texans have been able to do since Nick Caserio. So Nick Caserio came in 2021, right? In 2020, he took over in January of 2021. That year, the Texans were so misrun. They were run like the Chicago Bears. It was a joke. They had only 5 picks, and their first pick was in the 3rd round. They had 3rd round, 5th round, and 6th round. That's not this GM's fault. That's what he inherited. Every year since then, they've had 9 picks. That's process, and that's good process. But beyond that, they got Nico Collins in that draft. The top 2 highest graded offensive players. C.J. Stroud was not in the top 2. It was Nico Collins, 3rd round pick, and Tank Dell, 3rd round rookie. So I don't understand. I mean, I get that you want to somewhat discount the 2 picks in the top 3, or the 3 picks in the top 3. Okay, fine. But it shouldn't be entirely discounted. There's another reason it shouldn't be entirely discounted. How did they get those picks? In 2022 and 2023, they had 2 first-round picks. How did they do that? They did it because they traded away their quarterback. So they got a trade that netted them a bunch of picks. In 2022, they had 2 firsts and 2 seconds. In 2023, they had 2 firsts. In 2024, they didn't have a first, but they had 2 seconds, presumably because of that Will Anderson trade that they're super pissed off about. But again, still had 2 seconds. So after his 2021 season, again, 9 picks every year for 3 years, which include, in 3 years, he's had 4 first-round picks and 5 second-round picks. 12 picks in the top 90 in 3 years. 12 picks in the top 78, to be even more precise. So before we get into probably the more interesting discussion, I just want to say I haven't really adjusted my thoughts on the Houston Texans, because I do appreciate their process. I'm not going to dock them for having early picks. The fact of the matter is they've capitalized on those. First of all, they acquired the early picks by making a good decision by tearing this whole frickin' disaster down, shipping that quarterback out of there, getting psychotic value for him, maximizing that by drafting really premier players, making sure you have tons of picks and premier picks, and capitalizing on that, and they've hit on mid-round picks. So I have no idea why the Houston Texans would not be seen as a top team, because apparently they made a trade for Will Anderson that the value wasn't great. Guess how many Texans fans are crying about that right now? 0. I understand, you can't continually make bad process decisions and end up in a good spot. But they desperately needed this player, and they got this player. I don't think they're going to continue to do that based on the fact that this guy seems to prioritize lots of picks. He has good process. I don't think this is going to be a super regular thing. Anyways, whatever. I thought that was stupid. I just think it's a very closed off thing. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's more to it than that. But to just use a simply robotic, algorithm to look at just process, I can't fathom how the Houston Texans, I think the Packers have done an unbelievably good job over the last 3 years. I'm not sure they've done as good of a job as the Texans. Maybe if you remove those early round picks, because it's kind of, which you can't fully remove, whatever, but if you calculate it, and maybe Packers maybe edge them out. They've probably done better in the mid to late rounds. But I'm stunned. Anyways, the other reason that I brought this up is because I saw this tweet that I wanted to mention. Oh, by the way, we brought in defensive lineman Spencer Wage, defensive tackle, North Dakota State, 958 RAS. Okay, now I can close that tab. Scott Kazmar. Is this person relevant for any reason? NFL writer, PFWA. 21,500 followers. So yes, I don't know what PFWA is, but some kind of a writer. Got it. A question I'm going to answer this week, he says, is Caleb Williams walking into the best situation of any quarterback ever drafted number 1 overall? Now, my first instinct, as you can probably tell, why am I looking at the Texans and C.J. Stroud, et cetera, et cetera? My first instinct was to try to answer that question and find quarterbacks who have walked into better situations, knowing that it would be an uphill battle because we're talking about teams that have the number 1 pick. But I will say, it didn't take me very long to find somebody that you could at least argue was in a better situation, and that would be C.J. Stroud. Now, I don't know for sure, but Nico Collins had a 91 receiving grade and Tank Dell was 83. I would not be shocked even a little bit if that's a better wide receiver situation. I think a lot of other people would feel that way, but you've got a guy who's never been in Chicago. He's only ever been with the Chargers. He's well over the hill, coming into a new environment with a rookie quarterback, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know that he's going to put up the elite numbers we're used to with Keenan Allen. DJ Moore had the best year of his entire career, and he largely did it because he had a quarterback that sucked at being quarterback and force-fed him the ball 24/7 because he didn't know how to read a football field. And then you've got a rookie that nobody knows anything about. I have no reason to believe that the wide receivers are going to be better than this. On top of having tight ends like Brevin Jordan, who had a really solid receiving grade, and Dalton Schultz, who had a really solid receiving grade. Brevin Jordan, 75 receiving grade, contributed 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Dalton Schultz, 73 PFF grade, 715 yards and 6 touchdowns. That's a better tight end situation than what Chicago has, especially as far as receiving goes. The offensive line, you could probably go either way. The Bears don't have anybody as good as Laramie Tunsil, but they might have a better situation outside of Tunsil. At running back, they do not have running backs as good as Devin Singletary. They don't. I'm sorry, Bears fans. I know you think Swift is elite because you just got him. I'm sure you never thought Swift was elite until this year. Swift is not as good as Devin Singletary was last year. The biggest thing, though, is the defense. Now, if you just want to say offensive situation, maybe I'll give him the nod, primarily because of the offensive line. But if we're talking about the team as a whole, which, by the way, you also have to look at the head coach, give me a frickin' break. I'm taking the Texans. I'm also taking the Texans GM, which we've kind of just established. But this defense, with Derek Barnett, 88 PFF grade, Derek Stingley, 82 PFF grade, Blake Cashman, linebacker, 82, which, by the way, we've now got edge corner linebacker. You got Will Anderson, 81. By the way, 68 pressures and 8 sacks. 68 pressures on 454 attempts. Jonathan Grenard, 53 pressures, 440 attempts, 77 PFF grade. That is 3 edge rushers I've listed. 3. The Bears have 1, and I'm not sure if their 1 edge rusher is as good as any of these. I guarantee he's not going to be as good as Barnett or Anderson was last year. Desmond King, number 2 cornerback, 75 PFF grade, 81 coverage grade. The Bears do not have a number 2 corner anywhere near that good. By the way, Steven Nelson, cornerback, 73 PFF grade. Another corner, 72. Another corner, 71. This defense is night and day better than what the Chicago Bears are going to have. Beyond that, you could probably argue a few other things. Andrew Luck walked into Reggie Wayne and T.Y. Hilton. He also had Chuck Pagano as his offensive-minded head coach, which, again, significantly better situation. Troy Aikman in 1989, strong offensive line, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin. I'm sure there are plenty of examples of teams that happen to have, pretty solid situations. Peyton Manning in 98, Marshall Faulk and Marvin Harrison. But here's the larger thing. Who gives a crap? Who cares? At the end of the day, the success of Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears is going to have a lot less to do with the situation around him and a lot more to do with him. C.J. Stroud didn't blow up because he had Tank Dell. Which, by the way, who knows if Nico Collins and Tank Dell are half as good if it wasn't for C.J. Stroud. Probably not a coincidence that the tight ends and receivers all just exploded with talent the year that C.J. Stroud arrived. I'm sure that's true of a lot of the guys that I listed. This is something I feel like Bears fans just will never understand. And this has been happening since Justin Fields arrived. The quarterback is not just some nothing pile of clay that is 100% a product of its environment. And we've been dealing with this for a while now where it's becoming this growing narrative that I'm starting to get really tired of. Part of it is Fields. Part of it is some other guys. Part of it is, Jordan Love, which has cast some more light on guys sitting for a while. But there's just this idea that is growing in strength that quarterbacks that fail because the environment is bad, and quarterbacks that succeed because their environment is good, because they've got help around them. I'm sorry, but I'm not buying it. Again, I'm sure there's something to it. But we have tipped the scales to the other side, where we used to believe that it was the quarterback. And now we started to believe that it has more to do with all the other stuff. No, it has more to do with the quarterback. The other stuff, there may be scenarios. Maybe. I don't even know if this is real. There may be scenarios where quarterbacks that would have been very good got completely ruined by bad situations. But I don't know that that's actually a thing unless we're talking about injury. And there may be situations where guys maybe wouldn't have succeeded if, that is to say, they would have very easily been ruined except for being in this perfect situation. But I'm just exhausted with the narrative. Again, Justin Fields was going to win MVP last year, not anything to do with Justin Fields, right? Oh, no, he's great. He's elite. We already know. He's got all the tools. He's got everything, which is how we knew, by the way, in quotes, knew that Fields wasn't the problem, and it was the coaching staff. It was the head coach, the offensive coordinator, the offensive line, tight end, wide receivers, running back. That's how we know. That's our proof, because he's got tools. And those tools are not showing up in production, therefore it must be everybody else's fault. Wrong. And by the way, I said it was wrong. And guess what? They went out and they added to the offensive line. They changed the play caller numerous times. The tight end got better. They kept changing running backs. They changed everything. They went out and got a wide receiver who last year was a top 10 wide receiver. And guess what changed? Nothing. Fields got worse. You know why? Because it's him. It was him the whole time. He wasn't ruined because of anything else. It's the same reason why. And again, this proceeded. Even after it died and he was terrible, there was still this idea that, well, it was the Bears that ruined him. And if he goes somewhere else, he'll be great. If he goes to the Falcons, if he goes here. Bull crap. And I'm still arguing with everybody, including Packers fans, about this. They just will not let it die. It's not true. And then he gets sold for a bag of peanuts, and it's like, now will you believe it? Now do you understand that the entire NFL recognizes he's not a good football? Oh, no, it's just the NFL's stupid. He's really good. If he could just get in the right environment. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. It wasn't his environment. You cannot just put pieces around Fields and he's going to be good. You know why? Because he's a bad quarterback. This has nothing to do with being a product of your environment. Good quarterbacks are good quarterbacks, and they can rise above bad situations. Bad quarterbacks are bad quarterbacks, and they cannot make a good situation work. Now, there's a little bit of leeway in there. There are going to be situations where a quarterback would be pretty good if not for this terrible situation that's drawing him down. It could be a terrible offensive line or something. But again, we've gotten to the point where we're believing that the situation is the most important thing. And that's like the main narrative around Caleb now. Is Caleb walking into the best situation of any quarterback ever drafted number 1 overall? Who gives a crap is my answer. If I concede that and I say this is the best situation in the world, fine. No first round pick has ever had as good of a situation than this. It doesn't matter. Because the only thing that matters to me is Caleb good? Because if Caleb sucks, his environment is not going to fix him. And yes, he can suck in a good environment. That can happen. And everybody knows that. So I would happily give up. Let everybody else be great. If they missed on Caleb, it's not going to matter. Because they're not going to fix him. He's just bad. And conversely, if this isn't the best situation, which is why I gave up on this experiment, I put a little bit of time into it, but it's like, who cares? Whether this is the best or the second best or the fourth best, if I can find 3 teams that are better, the bottom line is, of course, this is a very good situation for a first overall prospect, because first overall prospects are almost always teams that naturally got the first overall pick because of the worst team in football. That wasn't the Bears situation. They're not a good football team, but they're not the number 1 overall team, bad kind of football team, or number 1 overall pick, bad football team. So the bottom line is, this is a better situation than a lot of teams get, but it's not, but you're putting the caveat of number 1 overall. Is it a better situation than a lot of quarterbacks who get picked at like 8, 9, 10, 11? No. What about quarterbacks that get picked later, like when Lamar got picked or when Jordan Love got picked? Was it a better situation? Of course not. Jordan Love was in an infinitely better situation. Who gives a crap about the situation? The question is the quarterback good? That's it. I don't care whether I'm slightly wrong about the Bears or the Vikings with JJ or whatever. The most important thing for me is that those quarterbacks are not good. Because as much as I can pick on the Vikings and be like, bro, you guys got a lot of work to do, man. This is kind of trash. You know what I'm saying? If JJ McCarthy comes out and is like CJ Stroud, we're screwed. Yeah, well, they don't have good defense yet. They need some peace. I don't care. This sucks. They'll figure it out. They'll get it. This sucks. We're in trouble. SOS. We'll probably beat them in the meantime. I'm just exhausted with this narrative of supporting cast. They're only good. It's like the exact opposite of what we've been dealing with Aaron Rodgers. Nobody around Aaron Rodgers was ever good because of Aaron Rodgers. That's stupid. Now quarterbacks get no credit, either good or bad. Jordan Love's good. Well, of course, he sat for 3 years. Well, of course, he had Aaron Rodgers to learn from. Of course. No, not of course. Not of course. There's a lot of quarterbacks you could put in that situation that never would have become this. It's not of course. It's Jordan Love. Maybe he needed all those years. That's probably true. But you cannot take away that Love is what he is because of Love. You cannot just plop anything in that situation and they're just going to grow into a great quarterback. I'm tired of the situation conversation. So here's me conceding that this is the best situation ever. In fact, I will happily do it because I want no excuses. Yes, best wide receiver group in football. Yes, the offensive line was significantly better than everybody thought because Fields made it look worse than it was. You have a competent tight end. You have a competent running back. Everything you could ever possibly want. It is the best situation any first overall pick has ever had in the history of the NFL. Okay, now go win freaking football games. Let's see if you can beat the Packers like one time. And if you can't, you are historically the biggest pieces of crap in the history of the world, ever. I'll tell you what, I'll even give you Caleb is the most hyped quarterback ever. I don't think it's true, just like I don't think any of this stuff is true, but I'm going to give that to you because I'm taking every excuse that you have, all of them. This is the best situation any team has ever had. If there was ever a team that was going to revolutionize how good their football team, go from like worst to first in the entire NFL, it is the Chicago Bears, because never in the history of the world has there been this good of a situation, this good of a wide receiver room, this good of a quarterback prospect. Never, ever, ever, ever. Okay, now you have to win the division. You have to sweep the Packers. You have to obviously get into the playoffs and probably get to the Super Bowl. I mean, if we're talking history here, which I think we are, that's the premise of Scott's question. Fine, let's not just talk about history. Let's make history. Let's do what the Bears have never been able to do, which is stop running our freaking mouth and actually accomplish what we're talking about, not just talk about it. How about we do it? Yeah, historic, great. Go be historic. Stop talking about it in the offseason and go be it for once. Okay? Great. All right, let's take our final break. And I kind of want to look at linebackers a little bit and blitzing. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
Have you ever experienced turbulence on a flight and wondered why?
And you can see all the terrain around you. You've got no issue with visibility or anything?
No, everything's PG.
Maybe you've sat on the tarmac for hours wondering why your plane isn't moving.
Well, we're outside here. They're saying the ramp is closed. They won't let us park because of Air Force One.
Listen in on the conversations between pilots and air traffic controllers on the Air Traffic Out of Control podcast.
510 declaring an emergency. There's smoke in the cabin. I need to make a landing right now on 31 left.
We have the most interesting, wild, and funny ATC recordings you will ever hear. Check out Air Traffic Out of Control wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
All right, so finally, linebackers and blitzing. I think every once in a while, the fan base and myself, or either or, in this case, I think both, kind of start just running with a narrative, and it's good to kind of go back and check it and see if you're right or not. Sometimes I go back, and to my astonishment, I don't know where I got that information from. Now, it depends where you look, but one of the things that I've been talking about a lot is Quay Walker and his incredible ability to blitz or, get to the quarterback. So for starters, again, SIS seemed to like him significantly more as a pass rusher. But let's look at a couple things that SIS has as far as specifically Quay Walker. Now, again, SIS is absolutely brain damaged in terms of their inability to separate linebackers, defensive tackles, edge rushers, and all of that. So, of course, it's mixed in with Rashawn Gary and et cetera, et cetera. But if we look at pressure percentage, and even this is worth noting, although it's still relatively high comparatively, the linebacker with the highest pressure percentage in Green Bay was actually Devondre Campbell, 28.6%. The second highest was Isaiah McDuffie, 27.3%. Quay Walker was 22.2%. Now, that's not terrible. If we remove Benton Whitley, who hardly played, and we could probably get Asamoah out of there as well. You got Alex Anzalone for Detroit, Jack Sanborn for Chicago as the only two higher than Devondre Campbell and Isaiah McDuffie. And then you add in T.J. Edwards as being ahead of Quay Walker as well. Other than that, though, I guess not terrible. But sack percentage is where he kind of ranks relatively high. You've got Jalen Reeves-Maben and Jack Sanborn as the only two linebackers in the NFC North, by the way. I'm choosing the NFC North because I don't want to use the entire NFL because there's going to be so many edge rushers. I'm not going to be able to go off the top of my head and realize who's what. NFC North, I can handle that. But 4.3% sack rate, third highest among linebackers in the NFC North. So not terrible. However, when you go over to PFF is when things get a little bit ugly, and these are actually just linebackers. If we look at linebackers with a minimum amount of pass rush attempts, we've got 74 total linebackers here. The two linebackers that actually made the cut because Quay didn't do it enough were Isaiah McDuffie and Quay Walker. Ranking based on pass rush grade, Isaiah McDuffie ranks 35th with a 64.4 grade, Quay Walker 58.2. He ranks 54th out of 74. If we look at pass rush productivity, which is sort of your pass rush percentage, but weighting sacks as being more valuable, et cetera, he ranks 27th, which it's a pretty big jump because, again, the sack rate was relatively high. But still, 27th is not that great. His win percentage was 6.9%. He ranked 52nd. And then if you look at true pass sets, this is where it gets really disappointing. True pass sets being let's eliminate scheme from the equation on both sides of the ball. So the way that I generally view true pass sets is, for example, as a pass rusher at least, because you can do this for offensive line as well. But if you're a pass rusher and you have a higher true pass set grade than a regular grade, it means that generally speaking, they're probably scheming to stop you. And anytime you can get a genuine one-on-one situation, you're a lot better than it would appear. If, on the other hand, you have a lower true pass set grade than your overall grade, it tells me they're probably using scheme to make you look better than you actually are. Because again, how good are you in these mano-a-mano situations? Quay Walker ranks 69th out of 74 with a 46 pass rush grade. Only Kaiser White, Jack Campbell in Detroit, Henry To'oto'o, Aziz Al-Shair, and Isaiah Simmons are the only linebackers with lower grades. His pass rush productivity in true pass sets, he ranks 38th. His win percentage, he ranks 65th out of 69. Even just cumulatively, which I thought would be a lot higher, he ranks 21st. He had 16 total pressures out of 76 attempts. His sacks for the season, he had 3, with the highest being 8 sacks. He was tied for 16th with sacks. So the production wasn't necessarily there to the degree that I kind of thought it was. But what I think, essentially if you agree with me that you're seeing or remembering, was an improvement over time. And really all that is a 4-game flurry of having a good pass rush grade, weeks 15, 16, 17, 18. Because his pass rush grades go 50, 60, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 40, 50, 70, 70, 70, 70, 50, 50. And even the usage didn't actually go up like I thought it did. I thought that they were unleashing him as a pass rusher more. That really isn't the case. So we'll have to see. We'll see if maybe this different scheme and this different way of playing and different way of attacking will be beneficial because, again, this has nothing to do with his abilities. His athleticism, his strength and abilities as a tackler, it's all there to where if he has a lane or whatever, he can get to the quarterback right quick and in a hurry. But my personal perception that Quay Walker had become, because I knew he was terrible at it, in 2022-ish. I remember watching him try to blitz. The guy could never, ever, ever get home. It was terrible. I talked about it many times that he had a pass rush rate, I think was less than 10%, which is shocking for a linebacker. Looks like for the season that wasn't the case, but still, it was not very good. And then in my mind, it had gotten better. But if you look at it, he had a 70 pass rush grade in 2022 and a 58 in 2023. So I just want to get that corrected for anybody that thought that, thought the same way that I did, that he either was a very good pass rusher and or he is a much improved pass rusher, because I don't think either of those things are true. His run defense went from a 35 to a 63. His tackling went from a 63 to an 82. His pass rush went from a 70 to a 58. His coverage went from a 70 to a 54. So run defense and tackling went way up. Pass rush and coverage went way down. So now that we've got that established, there's another question that I have. How much more might we see pass rush from the linebackers than what we saw before? There's basically two different answers depending on how you want to look at this. If we go back and look at Boston College, the linebacker on the team with the least pass rush attempt, not even attempts, the percentage, is Cam Arnold. Cam Arnold is the linebacker for Boston College. Out of 5 linebackers, he had the lowest pass rush percentage. He rushed the passer 20.5% of the time. The highest was Davion Crouch, who rushed the passer 31.4% of the time. That's the range, from 20% to 30%, were the Boston College linebackers last year. That is a massive jump compared to Quay Walker, who is kind of on the high end in terms of, he was the highest for the Green Bay Packers. He was relatively high in the NFL, but he was at 13%, not even. So the biggest question I have, can we expect a massive jump as far as blitzing from our linebackers? Or is that more of just a college thing? Because if you look at the 49ers and the Jets, for example, the highest rush percentage of anybody that's, well, first of all, not a pass rusher, and second of all, actually has a decent amount of opportunities, is the Jets' Jamien Sherwood, and he was 14.6%. Quay Walker was next behind him at 12.3%. So among the 49ers, the Packers under Joe Barry, and the Jets, Quay Walker was one of the most blitz-happy linebackers among that group. So I don't know. I don't know if there's going to be a massive overhaul compared to what we saw with Boston College last year, to where it's going to start looking like the Jets and the 49ers, which means Quay is not going to be rushing the passer much more than he did, possibly even less so, because I'm not even sure who the top blitzing linebacker is going to be. If that's more evenly shared, Quay is going to see a reduction in his pass rush attempts. Or are we going to see something, again, closer to Boston College, where all these guys are going to be coming a lot more? Could end up being somewhere in the middle, too, which is kind of what we saw with Ohio State in 2019, where they had a billion different linebackers. But if we just look at the primary linebackers, Pete Werner rushed the passer 3.3% of the time. Tuff Borland, 7.5%. Malik Harrison was 16.4%. And Baron Browning was 24%. So the full spectrum from almost never to way higher than what you see in the NFL. I will say, I think the fact that we have specifically drafted pieces that are very capable, meaning we're going out and getting linebackers that have blitzing capabilities as well as safeties and everybody else, leads me to believe that maybe Hafley is going to want to push that button, maybe more so than some other teams who possibly haven't invested in such a way. And remember, there's only so many blitzes that can go around. You got to figure we're going to blitz only a certain percentage of the time, sending an extra rusher. And then of that percentage of the time, Granted, you can send multiple blitzers at once, but, whatever. We've got Quay, who everybody wants to blitz. We've got Edgerrin Cooper, who everybody wants to blitz. We've got another linebacker, whoever that happens to be. Of course, we'd like to see corners coming once in a while. And then we have this pile of linebackers that everybody wants to. Javon Bullard, obviously, McKinney on occasion, and then whoever that third linebacker happens to be. Obviously, Williams is the guy that is the most highly touted as a pass rusher. But the bottom line is I'm kind of sitting here thinking, I don't know that Quay sees an increase in pass rush, and I also don't know that Quay is super great at it, which is a big part of the reason why I want to see him at strong side linebacker. But now it's like, well, I don't know. As a final note, Edgerrin Cooper, I don't know if you knew this or not, highest graded linebacker in all of college football last year. Not just of the draft picks, the highest of anybody, any school, anybody. Part of that was his 86.4 pass rush grade. He had 10 sacks last year. It was the one of only two, the other one being Nathaniel Watson. Watson, however, had double the amount of opportunities. Edgerrin Cooper had 10 sacks on 83 pass rush attempts. Nathaniel Watson had 10 sacks on 165 pass rush attempts. So Cooper's very good at it. But anyways, all right, I'm going to leave it at that. Kind of a rambly, ranty bunch of thoughts I had today, but there you go. I'm going to get out of here. You guys have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye-bye.